Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show. I am Rob. This is Sarah with me, and I'm excited about what we're going to get into today. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's good to see you as always, Rob. And I think today we should talk about memory.
Yeah.
There's a lot around this topic. So I know, as usual, we'll kind of start one place and we'll see where we end up at the end of it. But I actually was thinking more about memory and kind of the concept of memory from your talk about modeling and how
Mhm.
we model based off of we talked about time too, like kind of our memories of the past and how those kind of get pasted onto our self world model and the way that we interact in the world. And I just thought that we could kind of go deeper into the memory part of that and
Yeah.
kind of examine, what it is that we think memory is and how it's useful and not useful and
Yeah.
what it really is.
I
And
think this is a very different topic than if somebody hears like, okay, they're going to talk about memory. I guess they're going to be talking about like improving memory or, how can we have a better memory? And it's not that we won't talk about that. I definitely have tips. Like there's all kinds of shortcuts and how you can remember things better and do all that. But I want to talk about a much deeper part of memory and how it plays a very deep and almost covert role in our current meaning making and our sense of self and all these things that end up deeply affecting how effective we are in the moment or any of that stuff. And so, yeah, I'd love to get into a lot of this. And I think at least one big section of this talk is kind of dispelling the accuracy of memory and really showing in all the different ways how it, isn't accurate. Like it's not a movie just playing in our head that we can go back and reference. It's actually getting uh, reconstructed and updated and then re-put back down differently than it was the first time and re-strengthened, and then it's like pasted onto this moment in really interesting ways, and it deeply affects our sense of self. In fact, it might be correct to say that our memory is ourself in a huge way, right? Like our sense of self is what we know, what we remember, what we think about ourselves, what we think about other people, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a huge part of the self world model. And if we want to change ourselves meaningfully, we have to start understanding how this works and all the parts of it.
yeah, I mean, like so many things that we've talked about recently, I'm learning that like we have a natural tendency to do a certain thing or a biological or evolutionary shortcut to do a certain thing, and that can work for us or against us. And so I
Yeah.
love that this is just kind of another one of those things that like are great when they're working for us, and when
Hmm.
they're kind of outside of our awareness consciousness, or like we don't kind of have a grasp on what's really going on, that
Hmm.
it can really hurt us. So
Yeah.
maybe just so people don't have to go and search necessarily, would you mind starting with just kind of talking about what you said to me regarding how memory and modeling, just kind of the
Yeah.
short summary of how those are related?
Yeah. So let's start with like thinking versus thought, right? Something I think we've talked about before. Thinking, if we can think about that, is present, conscious modeling and moving things around, right? It's like an imagination. Um, Side note that's very, very important. What we tend to remember, we will remember both imagination and real experiences together, right? So, but
Right.
what we end up thinking that was a full real experience. But what gets clouded, a lot of it is that it gets meshed in with what we're focusing on and what we're imagining on top and extra meaning about how good or bad the person was, et cetera. And this ultimately deeply affects how we do this. But thoughts being past thinking that become memories, right? So a thought is really a memory that was you did the thinking prior, you made a
Right. Right.
meaning, and now it goes into your history as a memory. And what we're doing unconsciously that is enormous in our modeling or thinking about the world, like as we're coming to this moment, rather than being in anything close to pure experience, we're pasting on our knowledge, which is also our memory, our past thinking,
Right.
our past understandings onto this moment. Right. So we've talked jokingly about the refrigerator. Can you see the refrigerator without knowing that it's a refrigerator? Right. You come to it with knowledge and a memory of what that thing is, and it automatically and unconsciously gets pasted onto the moment. But we're also doing this with people in our lives, and whether we like them or whether we don't. And so the accuracy of our memory coming in, right? The error that can happen is when we're deeply trusting a memory and having it come in as part of our meaning making in the moment, it can be deeply distorting what is going on in the moment. And what's actually happening is it's recursive because that's now going back in as another memory, but we take
Right.
it to be just fresh thinking or fresh experience. And we don't really see naturally how much our old memory is kind of clouding or affecting or biasing that current moment. And so to take that out of very theoretical, right, that is like, if we think about your best self in whatever way, one way to talk about that might be a self that has the most options, is the most optimistic, like feels like it can do all the things that it can possibly do. And you could imagine yourself feeling that way in one moment, and then somebody that has scared you in the past or has really bothered you in the past like walks in the moment, like a more alpha person or something, right? And you can feel that just with the memory of who that person is, it can change deeply what options you feel are available and how to talk and how freely you'll share ideas and how much you'll now risk, putting your hand up to go do the thing for the group or whatever, simply by somebody walking in. And if we don't know that we don't have to respond that way, right? We have much more freedom about changing our interpretation of that person, coming back into just more presence, lessening the weight of that memory. But for almost all of us, until we learn how to do this and understand what it is, we're almost a victim to that because it's happening deeply unconsciously for us, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to call out kind of two big takeaways from there is that already you're kind of shifting my definition of, not my definition, but I guess my heuristics around the word memory, because I usually think of memory as something, deep in the past that's kind of like a complete thing.
Yeah.
And we're really talking about, from what you said, is anything 5 seconds ago, 2 seconds ago, context for what things are situationally, how we're like making meaning about whatever. So that just kind of a broader way to think about memory. When we say memory,
Yeah.
I'm sure people are thinking like memory books or like that nice memory or that bad memory, but like we're talking about kind of a bigger thing than just like a thing that happened in your past. And then the second thing that really stood out to me is I tend to put memory in the past and imagination in the future for no specific reason, but you
Yeah.
called out that your memories are actually actual reality, real events that
Yeah.
happen with your imagination. So your imagination is kind of everywhere. Is
Yeah.
that that's what you were saying?
Totally. And we also certainly have imagination in this moment. I mean, that's when we're actually doing fresh imagining, which we might equate to thinking, right? So if you're thinking, which would be, I'm not just perceiving this moment directly, I'm in this moment and then I'm thinking about it, right? In one sense, it's like a lot of times when we're suffering, we don't even notice what we're doing, but we're setting up how we'd rather it was in this moment rather than how it is. And then we're in that gap between those two things, and now we're sad about it or anxious about it, or we're not really present with what is. And so this can trigger all kinds of feelings and other things. It's so recursive though that now that feeling is going to change the memory of the moment, right? So if I've let my imagination, my thinking, go to something catastrophic, like I've just been listening to bad news, or that person walks in that I'm kind of afraid of, or whatever, it triggers an unconscious emotional response in me. And now how I'm coding how everything's going in that moment has changed, right? If that person hadn't walked in and I'd felt really confident, I might have had, a memory of that afternoon as, wow, what a great, meeting I had, or look at me, I was really leading and I was doing all these great things. But then that person walked in and it can sort of stain the whole memory, right? Now that's the creation of memories. I mean, from this moment to like how we're carrying forward, but we're also doing this all the time because we're pasting old memories onto this moment. And, let's go into memory in a more traditional way about how we think about it, and then talk about how we can dismantle how it feels like it's an accurate representation of what happened.
Yeah, totally.
But, we know from psychology and different things that have happened recently with like DNA results that have come out in court cases where people were interrogated certain ways. There's all kinds of priming that can affect memory, right? So there was a study done, and I think it was, they took a group of people who watched a car accident, and they asked the people, how fast do you think those cars were going when they hit each other? And then they asked other people, how fast do you think those cars were going when they smashed into each other? And the average speed was much higher for when they just said smashed into, right? The new information, the context about the thing changed the meaning making and the actual memory of what happened, and actually made everybody perceive it as they were going faster. But it was more than that. They actually, many of the people that they said smash to started to describe broken glass that they saw when there actually wasn't any broken glass. So
interesting.
So priming can deeply affect memory. So you think about, there've been very popular documentaries on different crime events, and there've been film footage of cops, interviewing this younger guy, or maybe I don't remember his age, but I think he was a kid. And you can see how manipulative some of the leading that the police officers in that case were doing, just trying to get him over and over again to kind of change his story. And so we can actually have what are known as false memories. And you can actually plant false memories into people. And if you think about that as like in 3 stages, the first thing you could say to somebody, hey, you might not remember it, but your parents told me that when you were a kid, you got lost at a mall. And they're like, I don't remember that at all. It didn't happen. Well, the first discussion of that, what you're doing is you're getting them to imagine the scenario. They're not equating it to memory. So now it's well, I guess that could have happened. And then the next time, maybe in the next session, you bring it up again. And now it's moved up to, well, I guess that's what would have happened, even though maybe I don't remember it. And then the third time you get it all the way to, oh, that's what did happen. And now you've actually implanted a false memory. And so those people will, then talk about it going forward as if that is totally something that happened. Right. And it may not have. So this idea to, even to the ability of like how much you can trust somebody if they are super confident and talking in lots of details about something, like it still may not be exactly what happened. And, that is in one sense horrifying, because it's like, well, wait, what can we trust? Right. There's that idea, but it also lets us kind of be a little bit better about seeing when people's memories are bad and things, kind of accepting that, like, hey, none of our memories are that accurate. And part of this is that there's also different kinds of memory. So I don't mean to just keep babbling away about this, but
no, I think that's a good, like, kind of interpretation of how most people think of memory. So I think that was good.
Well, if you think about it too, there's short-term memory, which is very conscious. So if I'm like, hey, remember these 7 numbers in a row, to whatever degree you're capable of that. And some of us have a better ability to do that than others. And you can even develop that if you work on it. But like, that's a conscious thing. You're literally trying to hold them in your short-term memory. Then there's long-term memory, and long-term memory becomes much more semantic, meaning that it's like a network effect in the brain that is, when you have to bring it back up, you're recreating it. And so you're recreating it with pointers and different meanings and all these different things that aren't, again, like watching a movie of what exactly happened. If you think about it that way too, our perceptual filter in any moment, we're not remembering objectively everything that happened in the moment. We're focused on one thing and having a very emotional response. We tend to remember really vividly emotional, scary things or difficult things or hard things, which is a survival instinct for us. It's very helpful in some ways. But mundane things where not much changes, we don't really record the memories at all. And so, again, I often talk about, remembering where you were on September 11th. That's easy for people because it was very dramatic and you can kind of remember where you were much more accurately very often than 3 Thursdays ago, which is just a regular old day. Like, I don't remember exactly what happened 3 Thursdays ago. So in any moment, it's not as though we're really recording exactly what happened. We're adding on our perceptual filters to that, our biases in the moment, our old memories that were there affecting how we were interpreting in the moment, et cetera. Then we put that, very partial, probably biased, very not accurate memory in. And then that gets dispersed into this recreation process. And then when we bring it up again, we rebuild it, bring it in and remember it. And then it gets put down again. And if we've made any changes to it because of context or priming or all these other things, we end up, putting it back down with new details or differences or whatever. So our memory is very, very, very flimsy at trying to get it exact fact, right? So that's interesting. It's like, okay, great. There are ways to improve that. And if that's interesting, we can certainly talk about that. But what I think is more interesting is this process of how those very biased, inaccurate memories that are very emotional and often primed toward the negative and all these things, come back in to help us make meaning in this moment again, and how that deeply affects our sense of self in the moment, what we think is possible in the moment, what we'll actually do behaviorally. And so if we go back to false memories for 1 second, if we place a negative false memory, does that have consequences now and into the future? It does. Like that can actually very much affect behaviors. You could plant false memories about a food that you love today that, you got really sick when you were a kid eating it. And if you do that, you can affect people to maybe not want to eat it as much now. You can also attach false memories of like really loving certain good for you foods when you were a kid. And that may lead you to kind of preferring those foods more than you would have prior to planting that memory in. So the real hack here for ourselves is if we can start to see how we're doing this, we can start to be more optimal with our own interpretation of our meaning making and our memories, and optimize those in the moment to not complete fantasy and fiction, because that would be deeply delusional, but to what's more useful in the moment, right? I don't have to overreact when that person walks in. I can actually just come at it, fresh and remain confident and do these things. And that's a very big possibility for us to optimize how self can show up differently in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, useful over, absolutely right is always going to kind of win here. This is just kind of an observation to share with you, is that so thinking of memory is not just like we'll call it, say, recollection of an event, but really like my thinking, my imagining, what other people kind of tell me, what I chart as like who I am, all the things really is memory. It's so funny to me how in so many ways our memories we've recently talked about reality. Our reality, who I am, feels so cemented and permanent.
Yeah.
And how kind of shine the light, enlightening, being more conscious of all the words that we use to kind of look at these things a little bit closer. Of course it's flexible. Like, I think very few people would debate that we have the capability to put something into our memory, right? If you've ever memorized a script or studied for a test or something, like we know we can do this, right? That there's a flexibility in our brain that lets us remember things. And if we try in certain ways, now I'm sure not everybody, but most people. And so it's just, we're capable of so much more than that we think that we are. And we're also capable than more than we feel like is possible. Until we break it down to say like, hey, that's actually like an imagination. Cause I know my memory's incomplete. I'll be the first person to tell you, I think my memory's incomplete, and thinking of my memory as, unreliable in a useful way, right? Like I don't have to make it cemented. Like that's what that person did to me, and that's who I am all the time. And like, so an unreliable, useful memory where I'm taking the useful parts of it and then tweaking it, is really encouraging. Like that's very exciting.
We have some diagrams. So in a lot of ways, if you're truly in this moment, and I'm just going to keep talking about this and hope that people experience this more and more. If you're really fully experiencing this moment with much less thought projection and more like just a really present state, there is less self there, and there's more just experiencing, right? So the way I like to talk about self is your self really is your history, your memory, your thing. And your history has lots of examples of what has happened to you. And in any moment, you could be bringing up different aspects of yourself to be amazing in the moment. Or if you went back and brought up all your failures and brought that into this moment and happen to be conscious of those memories, they're both accurate. It's just which ones are you focusing on in this moment, and which ones are you meshing into your current experience to give yourself the emotional reality and the creative thinking reality to either expand and do good things and take action, or slow down and shut down and feel horrible and be sad and all these things. And the other part is we often talk about assuredness of meaning, or what I call beliefs, right? The fact of like, when we believe that is what happened, that becomes a limit, right? That is shutting down your options for, talking to somebody about how they perceived it differently, right? Like, even if you can be a little bit more open to, well, that was my perception. I don't know that that's exactly what happened. I don't know if that's how you perceived it. Let's talk about it, right? And realize that my memory might have changed and your memory might have changed. We can actually get back to, well, who do we really want to be now? What's our real understanding of each other? Can we get back to trust or whatever those things are, right? A couple ways. I want to give two more examples. I think I've used them both in the past, but it really highlights how there's other ways that memories can change deeply. We've used that example of a guy speeding by you on the highway, right? And you get really, really mad of it. And that becomes something that like could upset you for the rest of the day, right? That guy made me feel unsafe. I hated it. How thoughtless. Young dude flying on the highway, like grr, you know, and you think about people who get caught in road rage and how attached to that, right? Well, part of that is not only that it did happen, but the meaning that you're associating it with, right? It's he was just a jerk who was selfish and wanted to get somewhere fast. And then later we find out with new information that he was rushing a small child to the hospital, right? And it changes the whole meaning of it. And very often we would then feel very differently about it. And I often say so much so that we might have actually tried to help that guy get there. Like we might have pulled over to get out of his way or, you know, carved a path to help him get there because our other value is I'd like that kid to survive. And oh my gosh, yes, of course, he should be allowed under those circumstances at speed or whatever. That literally changes your memory of the event retroactively and changes your current moment because you've rethought the past, right? So that's that's editing a memory with new meaning or new interpretation as imagination plus the experience of what happened, right? Change the imagination and the blend can change the meaning ultimately, which really is the semantic memory of what happened. And so now that story becomes, oh yeah, I was upset about it at first, but then I realized what happened. And now I'm like so touched that he got there on time and I heard it went well. And what, you know, it can become a positive story for you instead of just this road rage example of when you almost, you know, wanted to punch a guy on the highway. The other example that I've used, I know I've used it with you, you could think about having like a really loving relationship with somebody for years and years and years and years, right? And you have all these fantastic memories of what goes on. And then something happens at the end that you feel really betrayed. You know, trust is deeply broken. If you're not conscious of that, that can truly pollute like every memory of that person going all the way back because you've changed the meaning, the good or bad valence of that person to you. So now when you're recreating a memory that's years prior to anything bad that happened, many people don't have access to that pure memory of like, well, that was really fun and it was great, but it gets tainted with the new quality aspect that we've added to the person. And so the memories truly changed. It's like, well, none of that mattered because, you know, she was a pain or whatever, right? Like she's a bad person. And so this is what we're constantly doing. Another quick one, you know, if people change their political beliefs or do whatever, they will edit their own memory back to at least tone down or maybe even fully change how they feel they always felt about a political thing. They'll be like, well, I never really felt that way. I always kind of was more conservative or whatever, right? So we're constantly editing the story of us, which is our memory, our knowledge, our history, all that, to align with what we think is us in the moment, right? Like who am I? How do I value? How do I want to show myself to these people? And we will fill in gaps. We will change things to make that narrative fit what is, you know, most okay with our system of self. And, you know, that is deeply delusional in one sense, but if we know that that's happening and we know that that's actually how it works and is real, and we don't have just video footage of what went down in a really accurate memory, we can start to see that, oh, my own interpretation of these things gives me a whole lot more freedom to traumatic things that might be deeply making me sad today or holding me back. Limiting beliefs about myself can be challenged much more easily. We can open up, we can find other moments when we start to say things like, well, I'm never good at that, right? We can go, well, is that really true? Like just look for other memories. And what you find is because it's not only the experience, but the imagination, with creative imagining, you could even imagine times that you were good at something, and that can deeply help your performance in the moment. So this goes into, you know, sports psychology and all that, seeing yourself winning ahead of time. It starts to pattern in this idea of winning, and then the brain can more easily choose that in the moment. So all of this is playing with memory, but it's also this playing with meaning and interpretation of stuff in a way that's ultimately most ideal and optimal for you to be healthy and whole and you know, the best self you can be.
Well, and hopefully we're kind of connecting more easily for our listeners, memory and meaning, right? Where someone might say, okay, I kind of get, obviously memory impacts meaning. Hopefully we're just like bringing that into more focus. Another just kind of observation or story just to share back to that, because I don't, you're saying awesome things that are very interesting. I don't have a ton to add there, but I was thinking about how my long before I met you, but into working with you, I blogged, and so I never really knew what to call it. I like to write, and I was writing
Yeah.
because it felt to me not quite like a diary or a journal, and also not quite like a complete fiction. And
Yeah.
I knew that the purpose, what I was doing, is I wanted to capture like a part of me and then fictionalize it a little bit. So I had kind of this we'll say a memory, right? Like I was trying to capture a time in my life to go back and know, like knowingly, not twisting it, but like pulling out the parts of that I wanted to remember and leaving the parts that I didn't,
Yeah.
kind of by the wayside, to construct basically a story of a time in my life, but a very specific story that I was kind of choosing the narrative. And it made me think of that, because at the time I'm like, well, it's not really truly all of me, because it's like incomplete. It's like glorifying this one element of like my thought, and then it's dramatized by like whatever imagination that I'm like adding to my writing. So I think that's interesting to, with the context of what you were just talking about, and then be like, oh, that's what I was doing.
Yeah, all of these go into my identity, right? Like, who do I think I am, right? What do I think my capabilities are? What do I think is possible for me? And again, if we go back to like this optimal self that has the most options for creativity, the most options for action, the most options for emotional mastery, the most options for, accurate interpretation, perception, and thought, right? That would be the you that is the most capable to break old bad patterns and start better new habits and do all these things. But if we have these memories that come up as an assuredness of meaning, we believe in them, we're not even looking at all the memories. We're actually filling them in with gaps that quite often are overly negative and less about us, to be protective and to stay small and not kind of put our hand up and take a risk. We end up with such a lower version of ourselves than what is possible for us, right, in the moment. And so one sense, we talk about being really present. One sense is, are you capable of, if you're triggered or something comes up, can you put memory down and actually be more truly in the moment, right? Like, forget what that person just said, just look at their face again and be present again. Like, can you drop meaning? Can you drop how, because that new meaning is going against what you were expecting due to your memory, what you think is right due to your memory, right? All of the things that make you you. And so to a great degree, you become more bulletproof, because nothing has to attach or hurt you. And so in some way you can be really there, and then you can choose to attach to the things that are most valuable to you and meaningful, and maybe, either kind or, again, full of action, or the things that you want to be and do, rather than focus on the limits and, the negative delusions that might be, holding you back in huge ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply empowering. And like my scenario that I was talking about, I was like just trying to build this kind of remembrance of like one period of my life where I felt very brave, where I did something that was very out of my character and that was scary, but I like had courage in the moment. And I wanted to draw on that version of me that like felt in that moment like I could do anything. And I'm like, if I could just keep reconstructing this over time in my writing, then whenever I eventually look back, or I would look back at it frequently, then I'll remember that at one point I was this person that like felt like I could do anything, even if 99% of the rest of the day I don't feel like that person. I want to remember that there was a time that I felt like that. So it is really powerful. I actually had a question that I don't know if this is a stupid question or not. I hope not. But do you think that the way you're talking about memory and how it relates to thinking and imagination and kind of the thought space, can you have like feeling memories?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Like,
course,
or does it
right?
always, it's like a feeling that triggers a thought that triggers a memory, or like,
so because of the sort of networked meaning of this, right? Like, when we think something, feeling or emotions like come online with that, right? We split these apart to talk about them, but the whole system is holistic. And even though there's sections of the brain that are maybe doing more cognitive work and more thought work, what's lit up with them and actually tied in some deep way is, deeper into the limbic system, which lights up right with those thoughts, is this whole emotional center, right? So there are meaningful ways to talk about separating them. If somebody had a part of their brain cut, they might behave very differently because the emotional center doesn't fire with the thinking. But like, the way that we work is these things all happen together. And so what we're remembering are very often feelings and notions, and the parts we might not remember are the facts about that. So when that feeling comes up, we refill in the facts, right? You can imagine like a partner yelling at her husband, you're always mean to me when we go out, right? She's feeling it again in this moment, and she's remembering a couple other times that it happened. And now another part that we do with memory is we categorize, right? And all of a sudden that becomes the forever rule of you always do this. And then he's like, no, I don't always. In fact, I wasn't 10 minutes ago. I know I did something now, but like it's not always. And now they're in a new argument about that. But what's getting remembered in that moment, let's say they're now having a new blow up, is like a pointer to thoughts, feelings, imaginations, perceptions, partial things, wherever my focus was. Again, if that big, powerful, scary person walks in and I'm really traumatized by this person for some reason, that can overdo the entire memory of the evening, right? Like I almost can't get it out of my mind. And then that entire memory of that evening is just this one big feeling of like, I'm not enough. And that was horrible. And I hate how I can't really say my mind around that person or people in general, or, and then it goes all the way up into like, I'm not a good person, or look at what a loser I am, or whatever. Right. So the meanings get filled in around it. That's how we can prime somebody with, how fast were they going when they hit, or how fast were they going when they smashed, right? That changes the context. We've talked about the bird, right? When you think about the bird differently, a bird on your table for dinner is maybe a turkey, but a bird that you'd buy as a pet is maybe a canary or a parrot. Just changing that context of what bird are you thinking changes the concept. And so the memory that you're bringing up in the moment is just a new concept, right? But it's an old concept that you're trying to recreate to paste onto this moment. And I don't want to just throw that out as if it's horrible. Like this is why humans are awesome. This is why we culturally remember things and build systems. And, we have a whole culture and society that's built on, remembered things that were done by people generations ago, right? On top of all these things. So memory is deeply important. I just think that we don't see how it's playing with us, how it keeps us stuck, and how in the deepest level it's going into all our meaning making and perception. And again, to just really highlight that, one of the things that happens when you're dreaming in your sleep is there's a part that turns off the motor control of your body, and you actually are, it's like paralysis in the middle of the night while you're dreaming, so that your body doesn't act out what you're dreaming about. And that's because if that switch didn't get turned, the body in a deep way can't tell the difference between what you're experiencing and what you're imagining. Like that alone, that's a really big thing to highlight, right? That inside we can't distinguish the difference between what we're imagining or adding on to the moment and what we're actually experiencing. And what we end up remembering is always a blend of those, right? It's always unless you're really good at being present and not doing any thinking or imagining in the moment, and you're really just in experience, you're doing this mashup, right? And it's automatic and it's unconscious. The more conscious we become of that, now we can start seeing in all the ways that not only us, everyone else is adding really bad memory and facts. And I mean, this is every argument like, well, that'll never work because socialism XYZ, right? And you can't have a new conversation because I already know what socialism is and means. And like, we can't even discuss it because it's got that pointer in my memory, and I refuse to see it another way, right? So now we have to
or like the refrigerator, it's so ingrained, you don't look at a refrigerator and can't not see it. Well, concepts are conceptually that can happen too. Yeah, I was thinking,
and those are all, I mean, I don't want to say all, because there is fresh thinking, there is new thinking that happens, but most of that is old pre-done thought and knowledge and learning that we're pasting back onto this moment into the model of reality. And we're both experiencing, like, if you get hit with a baseball that was flying at you, like you really got hit with something, you had that experience that happened. But what you're going to remember about that is the experience. You're probably going to add an intention of the thrower, right? He meant to do it, or he didn't mean to do it, or it was an accident or not. That added meaning is going to change how you remember it, what you think about the people. And then the next time you see that person, you're going to be like, if you remember it as an accident, like, hey, be careful with that throw. And if you think it was on purpose, you're going to be like, that person's a jerk. How dare they throw something at me? And it's going to affect your next interaction with them, et cetera. And so knowing that we're doing this helps us meaningfully, when we get stuck, play with that interpretation, play with that meaning, play with how much memory we're adding. And quite often the shortcut out of this is to put down what you know, just come a little bit more fully into experience, and redo thinking on top of that and go, well, what's really possible here? And that's when you can actually speak up with the mean guy in the room, or actually take the action that is more aligned with what your vision for yourself is, et cetera. And you don't get derailed by these limiting memories and distorted memories that we have.
Yeah, I was like, that's why I was thinking about like, oh, do memories, are there feeling memories? Because there's muscle memories. Like I know there's behaviorally, like I do a lot of things I don't consciously. I'm like, oh, how do I like type on the keyboard? It's like, I know how to type. So my fingers just know, I know how to tie my shoe. So I was like, I'm loving this kind of connection to imagination and, reality or fact or subjective experience or whatever kind of mash to make these, to kind of really show that I have an altered memory. And also I was thinking about how, our thirst for knowledge as human beings, or our innate curiosity of why did it happen, or like explain it to me or whatever, we just had that kind of curiosity and wonder that I think we've talked about on other podcasts, is a kind of a catch-22, because we seem to like not always be the best at filtering our knowledge. Like we just bake it in and we're like, done. And it's like, what happened to that curiosity that even caused you to go look for the answer in the first place?
And once I know something, like how something works scientifically or otherwise, I'm deeply biased, usually without knowing it at all, to try to make any new information fit into that. And I will often alter my experience or my memory of something that had happened to make it fit, even if it was a huge anomaly. Right. So we see this even in some of the best scientists, right? They will bias old data to make it fit. And sometimes they're doing that consciously to cheat a little bit, but that often happens just in the interpretation, because we're not as good at separating the bias and the interpretation away from really what happened. And so, you stack the laws of physics, et cetera. It takes a whole lot of new proof to change those, because once we take those theories as fact, we don't want to challenge them. And there's tons of reason not to. I mean, they're, once they are incredibly useful, that is getting us closer to a model of reality that's deeply accurate. But we're still challenged once we get attached to that new meaning. That becomes, the fridge that we see everywhere, and it becomes very difficult to let new, maybe important information in.
Well, and I guess the other thing, which you didn't explicitly say, and maybe it's just something I took, or maybe you kind of just said it quickly. If our memories are, our imaginations mixed with kind of our fact that build this like story of self, right? That we carry with us to give future things context, future imagination, then kind of it's just circular, right? So like the things that happen and that you put in the past and then become you, and then, are projected forward. But I was thinking about one of our programs where there's like it's a goal setting program, and it's about imagining the future. And then, but not just like, oh, what's going to happen next week or next year, but like a big kind of exercise of like, what your big, dreams are. And it's hard for people.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I think I get now why it's hard, because if your story of self is kind of being trapped by whatever memories that you've created falsely or not, but about yourself, then when you project forward, when someone says like, dream big, what does Sarah look like with $10 billion and this, like, I can't even see it because it's not even in my memory.
It's not in the model of self. Like you can't, it becomes very difficult to even really deeply change that. Something that I think is interesting, and I don't know if this will, I don't know if I've said this well enough yet to make it really resonate with everybody, but again, like this moment in the comparison of when we don't like stuff, when we're just sitting around going, I don't like that, I wish that was different, this isn't enough, I'm not enough, whatever those are doing. And again, it's not just a model of self, like all my knowledge, much of that is my model of the world. But like we like to say, it's the self world model, right? There's no world without self, and there's no self without world. So it's the data about me and about others that is that blend of memory that I'm kind of pasting onto the moment. But if you think about this, for people that like don't have meaningful goals, right? If you think about what really good goal setting and goal accomplishment is, you imagine that you've got a good model of how it's different. Maybe it's meaningfully different in a big way, right? It's really different behaviors, really different outcomes, really different money situation. You've got all that going on. Well, if you're going to accomplish that in a way that's not frenzied and crazy and like, I'm just going to make it happen, like, in a way that we'd probably want to accomplish that, it's going to take time and real change behavior over time, and real things. And the people that are good at that, usually have some clear model, and they're calm about being present where they are, but also making choices based on that model. And they tend toward that, and they tend to achieve these things in deeply meaningful ways. For those of us that don't model the future, or can't, to your point, like it's just hard to do because we're so stuck in all our limits and all our memories that are, difficult or traumatic or whatever. What we end up doing is the model that we're making of this moment is like an unconscious goal of how we wish it was now, but we're not giving ourselves any of the time to get there, or any
Right.
of the any of the real resources to like live into that or make that happen. And so we just end up critiquing and then ultimately feeling worse about ourselves, because again, life isn't what it's supposed to be, right? And I haven't
Right.
consciously acknowledged how it is, or really how I'd like it to be. But what's happening unconsciously is I'm pasting on all these preferences and desires and all these things, and just being pissed that I haven't gotten to this, quote unquote goal that's really just an unconscious projection of my desires onto the moment. That looks like suffering. And that looks like somebody who's going to continue to have bad behaviors, because when you're suffering like that, you start to look for the immediate things that feel better, whether that's sugar or the drink or the TV or the Netflix
Yeah.
or the whatever.
Yeah.
Right? So does that make sense though, that we're
I mean, I
pacing?
think that really lands with me, which, and I think that was said actually very clearly too, which is that, what I hear is that when, even almost instantaneously, whenever we're like choosing to be in this kind of remembrance and it's crappy, like
Yeah.
bad things are happening and we're suffering, like that's when things really start to go bad. Like
Yeah.
you just kind of put your finger on like, here's the crosshair of when this is working, when it's not. And now once you're on the side where it's not working, all these other things come in, which usually to somebody who's less conscious or not kind of tracking that they're doing it, that's those bad behaviors, quote unquote, like the
Yeah.
drink or the whatever. That's then what signals, oh, something was wrong, but it happened
Yeah.
before, right? Like the behavior is the reaction to
Well, let me just say it in one more way again, and maybe I'm repeating myself a little bit, but like the way I'm talking about this moment is that if you really want to accomplish goals that are meaningful, to do that in a way that's realistic and mature and will ever work, you have to add the time into, a different model than how my life is now. And you would give appropriate time. Maybe it's aggressive, maybe you do it really fast or whatever, but it's enough time to actually make it happen. What we're normally doing when we're in the mindset of this sucks, I don't like that, I don't like me, this isn't enough, all those things that end up leading to the emotional reality of anxiety and depression and stress and overwhelm and all those things. What's happening unconsciously and automatically is we're pasting on this critique of how everything is horrible. So it's almost like we've got this goal that is different than what is, but it's not defined. So we haven't defined any way we'd actually like to make it different. And we're not giving ourselves any time to actually get there. We're just,
get there.
It's almost like we've already failed because it just already isn't how it's supposed to be. But again, we haven't really defined how it's supposed to be. We don't really know what's going on. So some of the steps to get out of that are, one, in a meaningful way, and I might even dare say like in a spiritual way, in a literal way. Let's actually change it to a literal way. Can you be with this moment and calm the critique, right? Like, can you, in the way that I often say, like, everything is perfect and there's tons to do. Like, can you hold that paradox of like, this is the isness, this is what's real and what's going on. Like, I might be sick, or I might be overwhelmed, or I might have money problems, or whatever. That's real. I don't have to deeply suffer from that. I have to be in that reality. Here's a model of how I'd like it to be. And then how can I stitch together meaningful steps to get there? And just doing that, right, starts to feel more confident. Like, now I have clarity. Now I know more what I really want. Now I've actually thought about ways to actually do it. And now I can judge the baby steps or the little doings that if you've done that well, those are not hard. They're not big, right? We break those down into really meaningful, doable tasks. And now as you start to accomplish those, you start showing up in the world as somebody who's actually doing what you say you're going to do and is headed toward goals that matter and all these things. And that alone helps you enjoy the moment and actually helps you accomplish over time the things that are important to you. So this rejection of the moment is some delusion of it's supposed to be different and it's not, and I'm just going to suffer. And so step one is, can you be in reality and be okay, not suffer as much? And then to whatever degree you want to grow, can you set those up in a meaningful way and actually move toward them? And,
Yeah,
that's helpful, I think, you know.
no, I definitely think it's helpful. And I just like, again, I love kind of starting with one thing and everyone's like, okay, we're going to talk about memory. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, I hope that for most of our podcast episodes, by the time they get to the end, they're like, wow,
Right.
I both get it completely. And that feels connected. And how did we get here? And oh yeah, like there's more connection to everything than is obvious at all times. But what I will say is kind of, just kind of a pitch, I guess, which I feel like I can do and you can't.
Yeah.
So, these podcasts episodes are definitely, we do it to give value, to help people, to, to be entertaining, all the things.
Mhm.
But like this conversation specifically around memory, like I just want to say about you is that you're someone who is very also talented in not only like actively coaching, but building programs, tools to help people do this better. So this
Yeah.
sounds, maybe theoretical or confusing, but like it's really like Rob is someone who I deeply understand why we're having why you have such a good grasp on memory, because it does impact change and self-image and kind of like, looks at the whole history of who you are and the whole future of who you want to be, which is like what we want out of personal development, right? Like, how do I develop past what's kept me, it's stuck and forward into what I want? And like your programs and the things that we're doing with clients, past beyond the podcast, really like you found the shortcut to do that. So I highly encourage anyone who is interested in kind of the actual application of kind of some of these things that you might be hearing to kind of look us up and look up what kind of tools are available to work with you on these things, because it doesn't have to be all like, it doesn't have to be all willpower and grind.
Yeah,
and
that's not actually won't work. That's not the thing that's going to work long term. I mean, it's important. Willpower is a good tool, but it is not the thing that changes self.
Right. Well,
in the easiest,
it's like
fastest path,
Totally. Yeah, right. It's like, having a sense of even what self is and how it works and how it gets constructed and how it gets changed, like already there, that's totally different than like this morning mantra is going to get you, you know what I mean? And so just like, I hope that our listeners, and if you can't hear this, I'm just going to say like, Rob has this understanding of what that looks like in a way that's really creates powerful programs that give people good results. So
yeah,
that
with like with really tangible, actionable stuff. Thank you for that. I love that. I think to wrap up this idea and just get to it, memory is not what we think it is, right? It's not just this recollection. And I sometimes go back and, one other little thing to mention. If you think about one of the most meaningful things that you can do in therapy, and this certainly isn't the only thing that people do in therapy, but it might be like one of the biggest ones, would be going in with like a phobia or a deep trauma, or, in my case, somebody who's been through a ton of abuse, or all the patterns that lead to addiction, all this stuff. The ability to go back and literally change memories, right? It doesn't mean you change what happened, but when you change the meaning of a memory, it deeply affects your sense of self, right? So if I have deep trauma that I now personalize and put into my identity as I'm broken, or I carry a ton of shame, or I do whatever, the healthiest thing that I can do is go back and reinterpret the memory or the meaning. Was it my fault? How can I understand the parts of it that I didn't control? These things, right? And you can actually deeply recode the memory. And when you do that, your entire sense of self changes, right? So like when we work with clients, we're looking for the unique skill set to do that anytime with anything, of course, right? So that's the one conscious tool set. But we also go back into your personal mess, and recode it in a deeply meaningful way so that you end up, confident, happy, full of self-love, psyched about your future, connected to your deepest purpose, like all those really meaningful things. And memory is an enormous part of that, because it's not just memory. Those are all past thoughts and past meanings that you've made that go in and get coded, and they're not accurate, right? So your memory is not accurate, neither is anybody else's. And it's also coming back to pollute this moment again and getting reinterpreted and put back in. So in the past, I've talked about, I think this about a person, and then next time I see them, even if they haven't done that thing again, because I pasted who they were to me back onto them, I tend to remember them the same way. And so now I have a longer history of that person that way, and it just solidifies and it calcifies. And this is what it is to get stuck into one perspective, one path, one quote unquote truth that for so many of us is far more limited than what's really possible for you. So getting how memory goes in and how it gets pasted on, learning how to not paste it in the same way, learning how to change ones that are stuck in your past, all of these things are deep shortcuts to psychological freedom and ability that are actually pretty incredible. I mean, these are real shortcuts that
yeah, sign me up for
traditional therapy.
psychological freedom. That sounds awesome. Yeah,
You got it.
so robscott.com.
Yep.
Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Libsyn, Spotify, Google Podcasts, we're everywhere. But if you're looking for more on like, the coaching and you're interested in working with us, head to robscott.com. That's going to have exactly what you need. And we would also love to hear from you.
Yeah. And rate and review, share this with people that can use it. Hopefully this is helpful to you, but also, people in your life that are stuck and suffering, and just give it a forward. It's always deeply appreciated. That's a great way to support us. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and attention, and be kind to yourself and everybody else. And we'll talk to you again really soon. Bye-bye.